Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. This week's AppSec inspiration comes from the 20th anniversary of the horror movie 28 Days Later. Not because 28 days sounds like an SLA for patching vulns. Most severe vulns still aren't patched until 28 weeks later, which is the movie's sequel, by the way. Not because the discourse it spawned around fast versus slow zombies was about as useful as shifting left versus right. And not because it's one of my favorite movies, but because it reinvigorated the zombie genre, and AppSec has a bit of stale zombie feel to it. So what should AppSec be doing to reinvigorate secure software in order to leave a lasting impression 20 years from now? Which means this week we chat with Patrick Vandenberg from Invicti about the latest web vulnerability trends and best practices. In the news segment, XSS posts a message in Azure. Researcher chooses a security topic. OpenSSF hires a security developer. An analyst shares some myths, free training, and more. Start running and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Developers have a need for speed to meet market demands, and application security needs to ensure that data and privacy constraints are met. Unfortunately, that can slow down delivery. So, is it even possible to deliver secure software quickly? Enter Secure Coding, brought to you by GuidePoint Security's Application Security Services. Secure coding is more than a process, it's a cultural shift, one that will make it possible for both developers and AppSec to build in security while applications are being developed. Visit our AppSec resource hub to learn more at securityweekly.com/guidepoint. Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the zero-noise application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Invicti AppSec with zero noise. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. This is episode 245, recorded June 26, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Good morning, Mike. I feel a bit like a zombie this morning, so I think I'm going to fit right in.
Oh dear, we'll find out if it's a slow zombie or fast zombie. Have some coffee while I read the announcement. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day invitation-only executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you register with code SECWEEK23. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecuritysummit to learn more and register today. This segment is sponsored by Invicti. Patrick Vandenberg is a seasoned cybersecurity leader and a director of product at Invicti Security. He works closely with security and DevOps stakeholders to understand why today's cybersecurity pain points are there. As an alumnus of several cybersecurity companies, including Hunters, Sneak, and IBM Security, Patrick brings over 20 years of experience across product marketing and product management roles. Hello, Patrick. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Mike. Hello, John. Good to be here today. Good morning or good afternoon, depending what time zone you're sitting in.
Lots of time zones, but lots of trends amongst those. Speaking of time, throughout 2023, you and Invicti have the AppSec Indicator report that's I think coming out, right? Or just came out.
It came out.
And we'd love to hear some of that. I have some, I took a sneak peek. I've got some questions, but maybe tell us what type of AppSec are we indicating from this particular report?
Yeah, great way to set it up. Amazing intro, and thanks for the time to be able to chat through different facets of application security. So, the AppSec Indicator report, it's actually in its 9th year. So we do this annually. And yes, earlier this quarter in April, we dropped the 2023 edition. And our strength is in DAS, being a long-time leading engine in the dynamic application security space. So we look at it from that perspective, and we feel it's also been confirmed that it is a very healthy complement to the heavy dev-centric focus that's been happening in application security. Absolute important facet and necessary. But just like the non-security dev pipeline spans right from code into QA and deployment delivery, such does application security. So we're looking at the software security pipeline. Let's call it the latter stages. But we can get into the details of that a little bit through our chat here.
Yeah, I think part of it too, especially coming from a DAS perspective, I think some of what is the report is showing is that the more you scan, the more you find. That's a bit of a truism, right? It's a little bit of observer bias. We're looking for vulns, and we're finding them, which is a good thing. We do want to find out what's wrong with our software, but it gets to the classic: the more you scan, the more you find, the more you fix. But are people really fixing everything quickly? Because as I mentioned in the intro, we've seen 28 weeks later or longer for even severe vulns to get fixed.
That's a really amazing way to open up, because I could take this into different tentacles for our conversation. So let me try to non-ramble here, but let's hit maybe there's one or two branches of that need some attention. So first off, it is a truism. And what we would also say to that is, have we ever seen the data to support it other than, straight cause and effect? Okay, I scan, I find, and I fix some. But when we connect this to overall risk profile of an organization, other than just accepting that we need to do this, how do organizations improve? Like any facet in security, taking the first step is great, but the steps should never stop. And I think there's some grounding there in this. And what I mean by this is what we've discovered in this data set is that organizations are scanning more. And I can touch on the data in a bit after we go through this concept, but they're scanning more, a lot more. That's on the increase. And you're finding more vulnerabilities, which means organizations are getting more reps at it. And so as the scans have gone up, the vulnerabilities have ticked down. So what that suggests is there's data here to back up the point that if you scan more, your vulnerabilities go down, which means you're controlling your application attack surface better, right? And your risk is reducing. So it's the data set that backs up that path to say, scan more, you find more, you're going to fix more and get better at it, and then your risk reduces. And here's might be a good point for some analogies. So if you were to say, look at an elite athlete, the more reps that they do in trying to develop any particular skill, they get better. If somebody was new to a job, perhaps on an assembly line, for instance, the more time they put in, the more reps they go through, the more proficient they get at it. I think that's true for application security as well, be it collaboration between the AppSec team and DevOrg, or a developer individually. So, if a developer sees, a cross-site scripting or SQL injection vulnerability or any number, and it somehow comes through like a few times in a couple of weeks, that they're going to get better at it, whether they want to or not, because they don't want to have to deal with this. They don't want to derail their code. As we know, it's not the primary function, but when you do stuff more often, you find better ways to be efficient. And certainly in tech, I think with, the high degree of skill across the board, people don't want to waste time at their jobs. They want to be good at it. They want to be exceptional. They want to be efficient at it. So there's just no other way but to get better at it. And as you do that, you get more efficient and you remove the vulnerability. So the more you do it, the better you get. That's the whole idea. And yeah, absolutely, it's a truism, but I got to restate, we saw the data here that, scan more. So the average scans go up. The vulnerabilities have downticked significantly, and companies are in a better state with their application posture.
Yeah, I want to poke at that a bit too, because I always get leery of analogies, because are we talking about a good analogy, or are we just talking about the analogy itself? Here, I think the reps, you mentioned like the reps as that touch point of developers and AppSec collaboration, talking with each other. I would hesitate for listeners to take the lesson here that the reps are, we fix this cross-site scripting, then we fix this other one, then we fix this other one. Because I don't think that's exactly what you're saying. When there's an underlying aspect, if we're being more efficient, why aren't we taking a step back to look at our code and figure out how can we have the 50th, the 500th, the millionth cross-site scripting? Let's target that attack class or that vulnerability class. And I wonder if that is what is the aspect that's causing the downtick in severe vulns, if you will, rather than just we're fixing we're fixing symptoms quicker.
So I think there's a couple of ways I'd answer that. And the first one is, in the improvement within an organization itself, addressing any particular vulnerability, I think there's two ways that happens. One, they become more proficient at it. So identification, understanding, and ticketing of a particular issue, and then the developer actually fixing it. But the second part, and I'm sure you've had numerous episodes that talk about people, process, technology, and the learning training aspect in security. Well, the more any particular developer does this, the smarter they're going to get on it. Especially if, let's say, they're newer in the profession and haven't learned a lot of this. You can have a more significant upgrade. So there's two ways that there can be improvements there. Secondly, what we saw from the report, though, is in the case of cross-site scripting, we did see actually a 12% downtick with cross-site scripting, and with modern or single-page applications, in JavaScript, using certain frameworks, React and Angular, there's good guardrails for that. So there's a whole other reason why in some classes of vulnerabilities, to your point, we are seeing some improvements. Others we're seeing upticks. So it's not always the same. I'll throw another one in too, where you can be making improvement in classes of vulnerabilities, but if you get junior developers coming in, you get third-party applications coming into the mix that you haven't seen. There's various dynamics where you can get vulnerabilities that continue to get introduced into the organization. And I think that is an area where your collaboration and operational efficiency have a positive impact on maintaining, containing risk, or at least risk expansion from applications.
And I like the framing here around risk, because you're not talking about just vulns, you're talking about just raw numbers of how many findings are coming up, you're talking about risk. So I'm curious if, as you see the more scanning and a downtick perhaps in the severe vulns, does that mean then where does the effort spent on fixing get reallocated? Do you see people then just putting that time into the low risk vulns, or are they putting time instead into education, helping those junior devs, putting it into something else? And there's an answer I hope that is in there, but I'm curious what it looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, I think there's some healthy guidance around that, but with anything there's a spectrum, right? There's limited time, resources. There's an overwhelming option pool of tooling that an organization could pursue. So we absolutely saw in the results of this data set. And by the way, I don't think I shared on the top. Our data set for this report included 1.7 million scans. So a healthy collection of data to see some trends and profiles emerge. But certainly, and we have a table in the report that shows, medium and low vulnerabilities barely touched, where you're somewhere in the range, give or take 90% prevalence of those vulnerabilities year to year to year. There's fluctuations, but by and large, they're not touched. It's just, it's an opportunity cost.
Just to be clear there, you're saying that the low and mediums aren't being fixed, not that they're not found.
Correct. They're being found at a rate somewhere in the range of about 90% of the apps that are scanned are showing medium and low vulnerabilities, right? Of any classification. Yeah. So, a lot. And it shows they're not being touched. Teams are not getting to it. And that's where the risk conversation, right? It's to use the term again, it's a risk reward type of dynamic of where am I investing my AppSec team's time and my developers' time for what we're paying them to do. But what that also means is the time around application security is heavily focused around severe vulnerabilities. So your high severity and your critical severity vulnerabilities, where it needs to be. And the prevalence there is quite low. So, you're looking in, the single digit, low double digit percentage as far as prevalence, right? So it could be somewhere in the range of, it could be 5% of the applications might find a high or severe vulnerability. And again, this varies year to year, varies with your vulnerability types that are being found. But it's almost the inverse, John, your question, clarification of prevalence of the severe ones. So what it says is, okay, time is absolutely spent where it needs to be, and it predominantly is making a dent, but it's not turning that tap off tight. And that poisoned water is leaking through regardless of what teams try to do.
With that, close to 1.7 million scans. I think you also have this across industries, right? So do you see this attention to risk? Are you able to infer orgs higher, lower maturity, size of orgs, or even industries? Are there areas that we could point to say, here's where we see positive, there's some optimism, here's where we may be sliding, or for other reasons, AppSec needs more investment, needs a change of pace because there's actually getting worse to some degree?
Yeah, so some interesting conclusions here that, and maybe conclusions is, observations, better word. So when we looked at major industry groupings, we saw about half, slightly more than half, I think, of our major industries showed a steady increasing scanning rate. So, and I don't mean just like 1 year they're up. I mean, consistently up for the 4-year period of this report, which is 2019 through 2022. So, major industries like consumer goods, communications, healthcare, technology, transportation, there's a few others I'm missing in that data set, but you have a really healthy group of them that notably continue to increase scanning. And if you look at, what have we had? We've had president's executive orders, we have regulations come down more clearly. We've had COVID go through that have affected dynamics with businesses trying to expand in online world versus real world. So props to those organizations. And, if our tourism from earlier conversation is on point, then, the more you scan, the more you find, the better your risk. So they're trending in the right direction. Now, we did see a couple of organizations that or areas that had trended down, which was kind of surprising. And, the one thing that really popped out, actually, there's another area too that were flat. And I think while the data doesn't suggest this, my experience over the past couple of decades suggests that public sector and financial services were kind of trending, flat, slight fluctuations, but normal. And in my experience, and you tell me from what you've heard from all your guests, but, those are two very mature, well-invested sectors as far as security goes, regardless of the segment. And so I think their history and maturity of the technology adoption and the processes, that's playing out fine. The one that really jumped out, though, jumped off the page to us, was manufacturing, interestingly. And the what really surprised in that case was like a surge, a new level, a new plateau in the amount of scanning that manufacturing did. So we obviously had to double click, and we want to continue to explore this. But manufacturing was showing about 3 times the amount of scanning, and there was a subset of customers in the manufacturing space that had a very healthy or mature adoption of dynamic scanning into the CI/CD pipeline. So they had automated their testing. And this sort of goes back to the software pipeline that I was mentioning earlier, where, DAST has shifted earlier into that pipeline, left, if you will, to get as close to dev as possible. And manufacturing has absolutely done that. And it makes sense, right? So manufacturing perhaps an industry that doesn't invest in security as much as others on average. And you see how COVID would have forced a shift, transformation to the digital world in some aspects of manufacturing, and commensurate with that, it looks like they adopted security practices to do that the best or in safest way they could for their businesses. So that was our big takeaway there. Actually, I don't think I mentioned the two industries that were on the downtick, and media and entertainment were oddly on the downward, and again, not a 1 year fluctuation, 3 years steady.
What's the first one, Patrick?
Media and
Okay.
entertainment, and services too. Broad services was the other one. So the first one actually was a grouping, but I find that odd and potentially concerning. So I'm really eager to see the data set for next year to see how these go. But if the data supporting that truism we've been talking about is solid, then the corollary is concerning, right? So if you scan less, you're going to find less, you have less repetitions on it, and you're going to start missing stuff. Your risk profile is going to go in the wrong direction. So, perhaps there's some guidance there.
No, that's interesting. I think on that aspect of, it's interesting manufacturing stands out as such a big leap. And again, we'll say observation,
Yes.
Rather than conclusion, in the sense of, there is more regulation coming to IoT. Maybe that's an aspect of it, or just supply chain attacks. They can live a lot longer because notoriously, IoT or even IIoT in the industrial space tend to be longer life cycles to update and whatnot, or they're placed in interesting areas, so they're nice and juicy targets too.
Yeah, like there's industrial control systems, CERT guidelines, right, as an example, to support the industry.
So a lot of this is talking about, you did mention, shift left, and I was teasing a bit about that as a phrase, and I think we can perhaps just smile and say we're expanding the scope of security. We're not just saying that the AppSec team says, developers, it's your problem. Now we're going to go sip martinis on the beach. So if we're expanding left or expanding right for that matter, I think those are leaning more into the ideas of mature practices. When you see these types of scanning, are there, I don't think the solution for anybody is just buy and deploy a scanner, because there's processes around it. And you alluded to this a little bit already. What do you see, as those positive practices, the ways of just bringing in a tool to make it successful, right, so that an organization can have that good conversation about, here's a bunch of vulns. Do we even need to fix them? Which I think is actually an honest, healthy conversation to have for an org.
Yeah. Great question. So what's the best way? Because there's a lot of conversation that we could get into there, and there's debate, and there's purist approaches to it. So the first thing I should say is, there's a lot of people don't like the shift left. When they take a very pure approach to software development today, it's more of an infinity cycle on development. So absolutely respecting that. Let's just simplify this conversation for DAST. Shifting left just means we're getting it earlier into that, infinity cycle of a development. Right?
Fair enough.
Conceptually easy. So that's the point of it. And I think what we've seen, if we pop back 15 to 20 years ago when DAST was really starting to get broadly adopted, one of the first testing tools with broad adoption anyways, that was the first era of identifying or recognizing the friction between security coming into my camp and telling me what I can and can't do with my applications that I'm trying to build, right? So development. So there was the first era of friction and trying to find a way through it. And I think we're seeing that again. After that, we had more naturally dev-centric tooling like static code inspection, and then software composition analysis, of course. So I think that really helped development understand the importance and value and the how around embracing, to whatever means they can, embracing application security testing. But it feels like there's another phase of friction that has developed. And the push of cloud adoption in the past, say, half decade surge, and the push or surge in rapid software development and deployment now, when the frequency of updates means the pressure is even higher on development, which means as soon as it's out the door, don't come back to me tomorrow or Monday with something about that app, because I'm long past that project. I'm on to something else right away. So this window gets tighter and tighter. So this is where I think if we can get real world functionality testing to expose vulnerabilities that other methods can't, or to complement what other methods are finding so that you're not distracting the developers, the closer we can get that to the developer's time on that code base, the better. It reduces the friction, reduces the window, and it supports the velocity of software development and updates that they're going through. So there's the value, I think, in the shift left, right, where it's embedded cleaner into the software development process.
And I'm curious, because you obviously come at this from the vendor perspective too. Who are you having these conversations with in terms of the adopting the tools, integrating the tools? Is it the AppSec team, or do you see actually more conversations with the engineering side, with the DevOps team, or someone like a CTO branch rather than the CISO branch?
Yes.
Okay, next question.
Instead of my 5-figure number, I'll give you one syllable. So, no, I'm saying that facetiously, of course. You could have any profile from an organization, depending if you're talking SMB, enterprise, large enterprise,
sure.
depending on the maturity scale, depending how they've decided to approach the problem or the challenge. You always have someone or in application security that's driving it because they have the mandate around secure software. There is more and more buy-in on the development side. And I think from a DAST vendor, we're less, not completely, but we're a little less likely to get direct engagement for development because of the method of DAST versus, say, SAST. But that's not exclusively true. We're definitely seeing more engagement, more budget ownership from development. That could be a security maven in the dev org or manager. It could be the DevOps function that is well built out in an organization. Focusing more on build systems and testing requirements to own all the tooling and processes around it. So it's a really varied response to that. And the guidance is, and I think I said this somewhat differently, but it holds true. Just keep taking steps forward. And you can't accept where we were a year ago or a phase ago in this space to be acceptable. That's absolutely true in any segment of application security. But to think that we're actually seeing a resurgence in DAST, which was a bit of a surprise to me. And I think I mentioned some of the dynamics for it, but it just shows that, as environments change, as tooling changes, as malicious methods evolve, we've always got to be on our toes. So, maybe I can jump back to, the shift left and shift right conversation when you're talking about the expand dynamic. We covered the shift left side, but most other segments are in security. You see them pushing towards continuous monitoring, right? That visibility without gaps over time scale, so that you know what's going on in all aspects of your environment. The equivalent of that in application security is getting to continuous automated scanning in production. So the smaller you make those windows between your scans, the less vulnerable you are to updates, third-party apps coming in, or exploited vulnerabilities that may be happening in that space. Now, in the truest sense, it's not continuous monitoring, but you're approximating that, right? So if we've now progressed from annual or quarterly scans at a DAS level to weekly, and if it's critical applications, maybe there's certainly tighter scale with some customers. You're approximating that continuous visibility state, but with your applications. Now, we understand also there's dynamics with production scanning. You have to be prudent about that. Some customers don't want to do it. But do you want to be the one, and maybe it's a first test on your production scan or checkpoints on it. Do you want to be the one to expose it? Because you see more in production than you do in a staging environment, right? You see it in its real state. And yes, you can taint and mess up databases and those other issues, but you're better off to set up a controlled state to do that and understand what's happening if that's business critical application, as opposed to knock that down in scheduled scan windows, etc. So there's ways to do it properly and safely. So this is the shift right dynamic that we're seeing a set of customers push to.
Yeah, I've seen just anecdotally, I have a background in DAS, and I've seen people run against a production system, like basically a wiki scanning with an editor access level with DAS. And I think you can already imagine what's going to happen there as it dumps in a bunch of things. So yeah, there is some nuances to be careful about that. But I think that is perhaps also something that's a recognizable problem in the sense of testing what's going to happen. Are we going to pollute our production data? Do we have ways of testing in production? And I'm trying to tie that into also mentioning these conversations with the development side of the house. What do the risk conversations look like? How do we have productive risk conversations with developers and not having to rely on CVEs, CVSS scores, other type of just, the jargon of AppSec that might inform risk, but gets way too into the weeds. I'm just curious if you've seen developers have that risk conversation successfully, or what are good ways to engage that?
I think we get to the risk conversations through productivity lens. So, developers, what's their first and second priority? Well, first priority is functionality. Build and kick out the code, right? Deploy the app. Second priority, if it's that high, is security. So unless somebody is taking to security in their career, perhaps they're leaning to be a security maven. Perhaps there's a role in their organization, or they see a career path in DevSecOps. Predominantly looking at it from a bandwidth in a productivity lens, I think. Before you get to, okay, well, what's the line on our risk tolerance around this? So, your risk, I don't see predominantly development setting those baselines or drawing those lines. That's coming from, the CISO's organization or some other seat in the C-suite that's determining what their line of business can accept or not accept. And then it becomes a function of, okay, how can we best support the business needs safely? And so we get to that, all right, it seems like there's an acceptance drawn at critical and high vulnerabilities and the breaches that are known over the years and where they're exploited. Now, we all know there's innocuous ways in that clever attackers have been able to figure out over the years, but by and large, risk is not and never has been about 100% security. Risk has been a weighing of tolerance of security and potential exposure with other needs of the business. And I think this is, just a fair example of that. We've got to push out. In extreme cases, some businesses perhaps not savvy in security and application security, they'll just rely on paying their cybersecurity insurance and go very light, right? I mean, it's the risk decision is very gray. So in this case, I think there's an acceptance of severe vulnerabilities that we'll pursue, and we'll accept the mediums and lows.
Yeah, I think that's an honest take on it, because we reduce risk. We don't try to get to 100% security, because good luck defining what that means. And that priority speaks very much to the finite resource of time. Developers, I have a week this week. What am I going to work on? It's going to be deliver this feature, ship this, revenue generating product, or fix some 3.2 CVSS flaws in an obscure XSS in the install script for some Ruby gem. That's that's going to be a hard argument to make.
Right. One-off's one thing, but it opens the aperture, right, to a flood down the road on that process. So just not realistic.
Indeed. Yeah, and I think and that's what I love about this report is what it's perhaps observing or the lessons we could take from it about improving process. So I think for me at least, the take-home message isn't scan more because you'll get better. It's scan more because you'll exercise, or maybe it's how you'll get better. It's scan more because you're going to exercise that process of, here's a vuln. Should we fix it? Should we not fix it? How do we get better at making that distinction? And then how do we get better at getting rid of this entire vuln class, or fixing these more quickly?
That's it. It sounds like you were listening in on one of our latter conversations before the report went out. That's it.
Well, we've had a fun time listening in on your chat with us today, Patrick. And before you go, however, we always ask our guests to describe AppSec in 3 words. So I'm curious what that response is going to look like from you.
Yeah, I don't know that I've come up with anything clever. And we've chatted offline here, Mike, and I did literally have a couple of options that were 4 or 5 words. So those don't fly, right? So
got to prioritize.
I think I'm going to have to go with business safe software, because I love it. It's not the only way that this happens is an impact to the business, and it's not for the sake of security. The functionality is always first, which is all about the business, and then we feed in the safety of the software around that business with it. So that's what I'm going to go with.
That's a wonderful message. And Patrick, I just want to say we chatted at RSA, so I think somewhere on the Security Weekly YouTube channel, we have that conversation as well. So I'll direct our listeners to that. But I do want to say thanks once again for chatting about AppSec. Appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, Mike. Great to be here with you and John today. All the best.
Thanks again, Patrick. Thank you, John. And thank you, listeners. To learn more about Invicti, visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.